everybody. My name is Matt Hick and I'm Head of Volunteering at Science Museum Group and Chair of the Heritage Volunteering Group, which is a peer-to-peer network for volunteer managers in the heritage sector across the UK. Today, I'm going to talk to you about trends in heritage volunteering across Great Britain and the potential impact of COVID-19 on our volunteer programmes. Before I do that though, I want to give you some context around volunteering across Science Museum Group and within the United Kingdom. Science Museum Group is comprised of 5 museums: Science Museum, Science and Media Museum, Science and Industry Museum, Locomotion, and the National Railway Museum where I'm based. When I started as volunteer coordinator at the Railway Museum almost 12 years ago, volunteers were a helpful but small part of our museums, contributing around 15,000 hours a year towards our operations. After transforming the volunteer programme at the museum and increasing involvement to 40,000 hours a year, I was promoted to my current position with the objective of creating a culture of volunteering across all of our museums. Today, we have over 1,000 volunteers contributing over 100,000 hours of support each year. They're a crucial part of our organisation and key to helping us achieve both our operational and our strategic objectives. They provide support in collections and visitor-facing roles, as well as helping with more administrative tasks. By thinking about who we involve in these roles, volunteering is also able to support our strategic goals of building science capital and of increasing diversity, something which is increasingly important in a post-COVID world. In 2014, I set up the Heritage Volunteering Group to support volunteer managers across the UK. Volunteers are a vital part of the UK's heritage landscape, contributing around 520 million to the sector each year. The contribution to individual organisations is also significant. Based on our 2019 survey, the average UK heritage organisation has 92 volunteers providing 7,500 hours of support a year. Like at Science Museum Group, that support is spread broadly across a whole range of activities with a focus on visitor-facing and operational roles. What the survey also showed was the value heritage organisations do or do not place on volunteering. At UK minimum wage, we estimate the value of volunteering at around £61,000 per organisation per year. For organisations like us at Science Museum Group, that's over £500,000 a year. And yet the average spend on volunteering across the sector is only £2,600 a year. This works out around 61 pence an hour per volunteer. This represents significant underinvestment. This lack of investment in volunteering is reflected in our staffing structures, with 57% of organisations having either a junior volunteer management position or no volunteer manager at all. This has serious implications for the strategic development of volunteering in our sector, and perhaps more pertinently for this conversation, for the role volunteers will play in helping rebuild our organisations in a post-COVID world. The other thing I'd like to touch on is the composition of our volunteer programmes. Typically, heritage volunteers come from the civic corps. This is the 9% of the British population who undertake 52% of its volunteering. They're predominantly healthy, wealthy, white and older people. Almost 60% of heritage volunteers are over the age of 55, and only 5% come from ethnic backgrounds, and only a quarter are under the age of 34. By engaging with this easy-to-access group, museums have been able to fill their operational needs with relative ease. So why do we need to engage with a more diverse audience when we've got what we need already? Well, for me, there are 3 reasons. The first is that diversity creates more resilient volunteer programmes. The impact of COVID-19 means that many of our older volunteers will be unable to return to volunteering for health reasons, putting the operations of some organisations at risk. Having more younger, diverse volunteers would remove this problem. Secondly, it makes us more relevant to the communities we serve. By working with charities and community groups, we can provide opportunities to the unemployed, the socially isolated and the disenfranchised that will enhance their life chances and meet our operational needs. And thirdly, it enables us to enables us to contribute to our organisation's strategic objective. By considering not only how people volunteer, but who volunteers, we can ensure volunteering serves our strategic objectives. At Science Museum, we might, for example, look to work with people with limited academic qualifications, so we can provide them with experiences that help build their science capital, one of our strategic objectives. To do this, though, we need to break free from our traditional approach to recruitment, where we create a role and we advertise it on our websites. What we need to do is firstly work with local charities and community groups to create roles and recruit from their client base. This means working collaboratively to develop different models of volunteering that work for individuals as much as they do for us. Secondly, we need to strip back our processes and make it easier for people to volunteer. When you can go on Amazon and buy a book in 30 seconds, it's no longer acceptable for us to have a recruitment process that takes 2 months of applications, interviews, vetting and training. And lastly, we need to create experiences that meet the needs of all of our volunteers by providing training and events that are of interest to them. If these principles can become the foundation on which we build our volunteer programs, then I believe we can create more resilient, diverse and strategically powerful volunteer programs. Last month, at the Heritage Volunteering Group, we began to work on a paper with Historic England for the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. This paper outlines our joint proposal for the role volunteers can play in helping rebuild the sector post-COVID by embedding these principles in our work. To support this paper, we undertook a quantitative survey of our 400 members into organisational approach to volunteering, readiness for reopening, and the ability to develop volunteering in the future. This data was then used to refine and inform our final recommendations. The study produced 3 key findings. First is that volunteer engagement and support for volunteering needs to become more strategic. As I highlighted earlier, the lack of investment in volunteering has resulted in organisations not having the capacity to develop a strategic approach to volunteering. 20% of organisations who say volunteers are critical do not have a dedicated volunteer manager. This rises to 23% for the wider sector, suggesting rhetoric around the value of volunteers doesn't match action. Secondly, senior roles leading volunteer engagement are rare, implying volunteering is seen as an operational, not a strategic issue. And this is reinforced by the fact that almost 40% of organisations do not have a volunteer strategy. Secondly, the lack of strategic engagement at a senior and professional capacity means that organisations are not well equipped to develop new models of volunteering that will create a more diverse volunteer workforce that the current crisis demands. So support is needed to develop volunteering and create lasting cultural change within our sector. Lastly, and thankfully there's some good news, however, broadly speaking, respondents feel confident to redeploy their volunteers. However, some concerns exist about support from colleagues and senior management, as well as concerns about job security and volunteers replacing paid roles. Based on this work, we make 3 key recommendations. Volunteer management must be considered a strategic function in order to maximise the effectiveness of volunteering. Secondly, support should focus on enabling organisations to develop new models of volunteering and recruit a more diverse volunteer workforce. And third, sectoral change should be driven through existing networks and infrastructure organisations to maximise limited resource. Having just created a new volunteering strategy that reflects these ambitions, Science Museum Group is in a strong position to lead the sector forward. By understanding our cities better, we are creating strategically beneficial programmes that will help transform our museums and our communities. By working in partnership with local charities, we will create more diverse volunteer programmes, ones that are more reflective of our local environments and which are more resilient. Ultimately, we will build a more diverse, inclusive and resilient volunteer programme that serves our strategic ambitions and inspires futures. Thank you.